Hi, welcome. I'm Peter Fairfield. Today I want to say a little bit about forgiveness. Forgiveness seems easy, and a lot of people say, oh, I forgave him or her or them. But a lot of times it's words rather than changing the body. I've worked with very traumatized people, people that were tortured, repeatedly, terrible things. And the hardest for them to think about is forgiveness. So let's talk about the nature of personal reality. According to many of the great teachings of the world, Buddhism, Christianity, Sufism, Muslim, inside there's a great place of purity. Some of it's very small, and the great saints, it takes over the whole thing. And what happens is, what covers over that is our karmic patterns, our wounds, our psychological imprints on our body, both genetically, morphogenically, and things that have happened actually in this life. And so that tends to cover over this beautiful place. And as I've said in a couple of other these recordings, that each of us has this tender place inside us, this perfect and pure place. But we also have these actions that come out of us as a reaction or as an understanding of how things are, or improper realization of what people are doing to us or not doing to us. And so when we think about forgiveness, we're not really forgiving the act. What we're doing, we're understanding that that act, however mean or nasty or continuous, or you can think of lots of words, but the act is not what we forgive, because that's the result of someone's pain, conditioning, programming, and that they probably don't even see us. They just see through their own web of misunderstanding, fear, doubt, pain, hurt, trauma, all of that. So what we're doing, we're forgiving the Buddha nature for not being able or not being able to shine through at that moment. So we're focusing on the inner being, and yet being very aware of the negative aspects that have happened to us or around us. And so we don't want to let that in. We're not making that okay. It's never okay for someone to hurt us or do negative things to us, or do things behind our back, or steal, or any of that. None of that's okay. We want to make sure we don't have that in our life as much as we can. But if we see the Buddha inside, and we see the expression of this pain, torment, and trauma outside, then we begin to understand that it's not about us. It's not something that somebody is doing to us. It's not something that is about us generally. It's about the person's pain leaking out like a leaky pipe sometimes. And so we have to differentiate that. Now, in the process of our own healing, we first find that most of us are pretty reactive. Somebody says something, we get mad, or we shut down, or we close in, or we misinterpret it. We all know people that we say one thing and they hear another thing. That's their programming. They probably grew up in a place where they didn't want to hear what was going on. But it's possible to heal all that. So the first thing to do is begin to notice our patterns. You know, we have a physiology. You know, Western psychiatry thinks it's all in the brain, and the brain mirrors it. There are chemicals and neuropeptides and all kinds of things, neurotransmitters and so forth, that respond to our world and our reality. But if you look at the physiology of the emotions and personality and even spiritual development from the Eastern systems, Tibetan medicine, Chinese medicine, Vedic medicine, what we find is that really these patterns have to do with the organs. You know, we know from Valentine's Day that there's love in the heart, which there actually is. There's an awareness in the heart. We'll talk about that in more depth in a couple other talks. But what happens is that there's this whole phenomena of psychophysiology from an Eastern and Western perspective that holds these patterns, that holds the trauma, holds the pain. It resists some things and it makes up other things, and it heightens other parts. And so those can be worked with. I was on the phone with a gentleman today in Ohio, wonderful guy. We've been working for about 6 months, I guess. And he said, you know, I noticed that whenever I shut off from my wife, I feel this tension in my heart. I said, hey, A+. I said, do you think the tension comes first? And he went, maybe. Where did you feel tense like that before? Well, my mother would do things that made me tense like that. Okay. So that when you feel tense and distant from your wife, are you actually responding to this original wound or experience of your mother being distant from you? Well, maybe. So now he knows that he can breathe into his heart, his chest. He can expand and relax with the breath, which is a very important and powerful process. And in doing that, he can change the pattern. So first he began to notice that when his wife would do something that would trigger him, he would notice, hey, I'm triggered. It's not my wife's fault. She's in her own world. I've noticed my response to that. And then we notice in how that rests in the body. And then we notice that we have the ability to change. He felt a certain kind of anxiety, and anxiety is kind of a free-floating feeling. And when we pull the energy of anxiety actually back to the back of the body, the spine, this free-floating thing becomes grounded in the polarity that runs up the spine, and it changes that feeling. So obviously not everybody that attacks us or traumatizes us is going to go through that. But we can understand that there's a clear physiology, and that when somebody is mean to us or nasty to us or hurtful or, again, all those words you can imagine, it's not about us. Because there's an unconscious person that can trigger our unconsciousness. But over time we can begin to notice our patterns, we can begin to notice how we react, and then we can begin to change it. And then we can hold the space for others to be in their negative place. Again, we don't want to accept any negative behavior, we don't want to accept anything traumatizing or negative against us. But we do want to accept that people get into their stuff. So we're forgiving them for not yet being conscious of their own pain. And we're focusing on the Buddha nature inside them and watching carefully the play of their own wounds and their own unfinished personalities. So again, when we forgive, we're never really forgiving the negative actions. We're not making that okay. We're understanding that those came from a wounded place, and maybe that person can be better or not. But if we focus on the part of them that's unwounded, their Buddha nature, then all of a sudden something changes. It wakes something up. And also when we forgive, it relieves us from the burden of blame. It relieves us from the burden of hate or fear or retribution or reaction. So when we forgive, it's like letting go of that. I don't have to respond. I don't have to remember. I don't have to live in the past. I don't have to relive this again and again every time something triggers me. I can let it go. I can make it okay. I can attribute to somebody else's pain and unconsciousness. It doesn't have to do with me, even though, of course, it seems like, especially when terrible things happen when we're young. Okay? Forgiveness heals us. Understanding the process of how someone is damaged and traumatized, twisted, and yet focusing on the inner part of them. This brings us happiness. And in the end, what do we want? Do we want to get back at the person? No. The ideal thing is to hold our space of clarity, notice our reaction, focus on their good part, their heart or their inner being that's untouched by their trauma and their pain. If we see that, it helps them heal, and it keeps us from being reactive. Think about that. Let me know. Thank you.